We'll just give it a minute while people join in. Looks like all the attendees are in.
Okay. So let me know when we're good to go, Justin.
We're good to go. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Okay, thanks. All right, this workshop of the Underground Safety Board is now called to order. And good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this workshop on local government agencies and abandoned lines. Today, we'd like to discuss how local agencies manage asset location information, facility abandonment, and abandonment of facility, abandoned facility ownership issues. All right, and I'm Bill Johns, and with me is member Amparo Munoz, and we are the board's Abandoned Lines Committee. And this meeting will be run differently than our regular board meetings, as it is a workshop, and we'll be inviting the public to speak in more of a free-flowing dialogue on the questions we will present. I will serve as acting chair today, and there may be other board members online with member Munoz and I today, and they will have the opportunity to speak and discuss what they have heard at the conclusion of the meeting. Are there any other board members present today? Okay, hearing that, do want to just welcome everybody, and I do have some opening comments a little further down the row, so next slide, please. Okay, the agenda for today will begin with public comment before moving into the workshop. And I have a next slide, please, again on my sheet. So it looks like we're on to public comments. Okay, so we will now proceed to public comments on topics within the board's jurisdiction that were not on the agenda today before moving into the workshop. Those wishing to provide public comments may do so by submitting them through the webinar audio functions. If you have joined via webinar and would like to make an audio comment on an item during the public comment period, please indicate that you wish to do so by pressing the raised hand function. Once the public comment portions of the meetings begin, participants may dial #2, #2, when they wish to speak to be placed in a queue by the operator. When staff calls your name, you may unmute yourself and may provide your comment. When your comment has concluded, you will be muted again. And Justin, if you can check for any.
There's one raised hand, number ending in 4316. I'm going to allow you to speak.
Oh, good. Hi. This is Steve Wu, and I represent the CGA Carga SSIP committee, and I just want to make a comment that we have addressed this particular issue some time ago in committee and found a consensus. And just for you, so you would know, first of all, is that as far as abandoned lines are concerned, the consensus was that there should be a requirement, a recommendation that there should be a requirement that the abandoned lines be marked, if known, with a of the appropriate color with a circle around it to alert the excavators of the proximity, or that there's in the proximity of their work area that there's an abandoned line. That way, so they don't assume the first thing they find is the marked line rather than just the abandoned line. So that was the recommendation for the consensus from the SSIP committee concerning the abandoned lines. I can make other comments a little later on as you get into this about ownership, et cetera, of those lines from my background as an engineer. And that's all. Thank you.
Great, Steve. Yeah, good to have you on here. Appreciate your insight.
No other hands raised currently.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. So if there are no further comments, we will proceed. So on to the next slide. Okay, this will be the purpose of the local agencies and abandoned line workshop. So this is where I said do kind of my opening comments. But so there are a lot of factors leading us to have this workshop and the importance of the subject of abandoned lines and their impact on safe excavation. The Common Ground Alliance Damage Information Reporting Tool, better known as DIRT, ranks as the #3 root cause for damages behind no 811 notification and excavating prior to verifying and potholing is facilities that marked inaccurately due to abandoned facilities. So we all know that there are very complex issues associated with abandoned lines. As from both sides, so many different parties, they have all different perspectives of this. Historically, buried assets are often out of sight and out of mind. However, over the years, many have treated our underground as convenient landfill dumps, where old unused assets are stored to rust away. And now they're plastic, but yeah, you can get the idea. Removing all unused facilities is not the end-all solution due to the adverse impact of our above-ground development and disruption to urban life. So we are stuck working around a lot of undocumented underground debris and potential landmines. The presence of abandoned lines can make an excavator's job difficult. An excavator confused an abandoned line for a live line and mistakenly strike a live line. So the purpose of this workshop is to hear from you. Specifically, we'd like to hear from you about the following. What information does your agency require of utility operators when they seek to install buried facilities in your jurisdiction? Does your agency have requirements pertaining to the abandonment of buried facilities? And how do you view the ownership of facilities abandoned in your jurisdiction? And before moving on, I'd like to have Member Munoz offer up your take on before we get started on our meeting.
Yes, thank you, Member Johns. For many of you that have popped into our meetings over the years, I have spoken very adamantly about abandoned lines. In fact, you can say that the whole reason I'm here today was because of abandoned lines, working in the field and being with an entire crew who actually believed a line was an abandoned line turned out to be a live line. You know, we narrowly thwarted a catastrophic incident, but that's remained with me. And in going through the process of my job, which is asset management, there's so many questions about the depreciation model, the cost of abandonment, who owns it, what's the standardization. And over the years, I've seen that many different agencies and many different roles take a different approach to abandoned lines. So today, I'm really excited for this discussion, for this workshop, and I'm really looking forward to hearing all the comments from all the different agencies and everyone's different roles as it pertains to abandoned lines, because I think all of us have an agreement that abandoned lines put a monkey wrench, and it's kind of like an Easter egg hunt when you find one that didn't appear on any of the previous maps or drawings or the GIS. So thank you so much for attending, everybody, and if anybody's new, welcome to our board.
Thank you. Okay, so the purpose of this workshop is to take information you've provided to develop a statewide standard or set of standards for managing abandoned line information and for excavators and utilities to coordinate to safely work around them. So next slide, please. Okay, question 1. So what information does your agency beforehand. Information about abandoned lines is generated before the lines are even in service. Local agencies often have requirements that a project developer provide utility location information in the permitting process. So to start our group discussion, here's question 1. What information does your agency require of utility operators when they seek to install buried facilities in your jurisdiction? And how is that information collected and maintained? And don't be shy.
So this
Okay,
is
so in
Tony
the,
Marino.
good.
I might be able to offer something, not from my own experience, but from a someone who we might be familiar with who works at the city of Agora Hills. Had a question out to her, and what she said was that cities, there would be an encroachment permit for work. That there might not be any GIS maps for these private utilities, that it's probably in a lot of places more of a requirement on the operators to maintain that, and that GIS information may not be with the cities. But there isn't anything particularly specific to that information. It's mostly the expectation is that the operators are maintaining their own information, and that's what our friend from Agora Hills has.
Okay. Well, I can offer up my experience because my background is an engineer, and I do prepare engineering drawings and encroachment permits and excavation permits and such that are usually go to various agencies. And I try to be as thorough as possible about giving information, just because I know these drawings are permit drawings, but they're also ultimately construction drawings. So my thoughts are the more information, the better for the contractor. The accuracy of underground drawings, as I think everybody knows, is sketchy at best, but it's better to have more information and then let the field people kind of figure it out, at least if they know and have the caution that all lines are live. But I haven't had anybody that I can think of provide a lot of pushback, saying really outside of just having a background of the underground utilities. They've never questioned or said, hey, we need more information, or really take a look at the underground. And I guess as a follow-up question, does any of the agencies, do you know if you guys, how you look at the underground lines as part of the permit application package?
There's people with their hands up.
Okay, I'm going to start with Schultz.em. I'm going to allow you to speak.
With the adoption of newer materials, whether it be HDPE or CPVC, other materials that may be in the ground that are non-conductive, what's the change in technology for locating these older systems? And is standard practice to pump a 2-sack slurry in and seal the line to actually physically abandon it.
Well, good. I'll take that on, but really appreciate others coming and giving your perspective from your standpoint, because we all come from different backgrounds and fields. But I think those are really good questions that we do need to standardize what abandonment is. Some pipelines and things, they have the state fire marshal or California Public Utilities Commission. They have fairly good requirements of at least abandonment, whether or not they use slurry, putting a slurry fill in the line and such. There's no definitive practice as I see it right now, but I think that's a good idea, and really seeking your input too with what would you like to see, for your agencies that we do kind of standardize what's out in the field, so that when we do encounter it, that we know it's abandoned and we can work around it without the fear of and the delays to construction that we are facing now.
There's another hand raised, number ending in 4316. I'm gonna allow you to speak now.
Thank you, Steve Wu, once again. I'll just make a little comment on what you just said. Being an engineer, or an ex-engineer, really retired from AT&T, the assumption was whenever you place a plant underground, you own it until you remove it. Part of the problem is that very often, at least telecommunication-wise, many of those materials are hazardous material, like lead sheath cable or asbestos type of conduit. They're recognized as that. And as such, you can't really abandon the line per se and place the liability on the municipality where that right-of-way is. So in that, and of course the EPA would also rule in that, and say it's the responsibility of the people who placed it to not only just maintain it, but at the time that they feel they have to be done with it, that they have to remove it if that's the case. And from an engineering standpoint, most of the time when they have to abandon line is really a question more of economics. But the other reason why being is purely proprietary, and that is that, at least in telecommunication, those conduits that are there, if they're left open, they are required by law and regulatory to lease those conduits out to other people who may want it. And very oftentimes, if there's a cable in there, that will kind of block that path. So there's a number of different things in consideration, but overall, if you place a plant underground, there'd be petroleum, an asbestos pipe, a lead sheath cable. Those are all hazardous material, and accordingly, you still own it. And that's, as an engineer, that's the way you had to look at it until you get to a point where you can remove it, or because you need the route, you just pay the money to remove it to place another cable. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.
So I think to kind of add to our friends' comments, I think that there's a new relationship that a lot of cities have been adopting, which is having their utilities, specifically their water, wastewater, be operated by a separate entity that it's no longer city. So I guess there's a couple questions that come from that. And if you're in that sort of relationship, I guess one of the questions that we should be considering is when new assets are installed, what is that communication process back to the city? Because ultimately the city still owns the asset. And case in point, I think I've shared with most of you guys when I started, how was the data maintained? We went from Mylars that you had to hold with white gloves that were hand drawn. Everything was handwritten, and an abandoned line usually was just an X over the line. Maybe they removed it. So we went from that technology, from Mylar based to GIS. And so I guess a couple things, are the cities that are on the phone having that sort of third party relationship? Do they get the asset information back? Is it shared? And I guess I'll turn that over, because I think that's kind of what that question is implying.
Yes, well, I think we can see how complicated it is. It does make sense to keep a asset, if it's in the ground and you installed it, that you kind of have to be the custodian of that throughout the future if you don't remove it. One of the big problems, and telecommunications too, I'm sure, Steve, is the ownership changes. I'm so familiar with petroleum lines. What happens to your gas station and all that changing. It's like same pipelines have 5 different names on them now, and they do just kind of, over time, when they get abandoned, they just kind of disappear off the books. And that's and I think it's kind of deliberate, just because there are franchise fees and things like that that go with it. And then so it's just ownership, and it's just complex. And so I think the agencies too have vested interest in these lines, and then maintaining the documentation is huge. You see any other questions, Justin?
There's one hand that just came up, number ending in 4316. I'm going to allow you to speak.
That's an interesting point you bring out, Bill, about that. I've run into the problem where we struck an abandoned petroleum line, and since I don't own that line, I cannot call a pipe fitter to come out and weld it, not knowing what it is or isn't. And I went through a lot of running around. Finally, I narrowed it down to who possibly owned the pipeline. It was from a company that apparently its assets had been sold. But I basically told them, that it wasn't marked, and it wasn't on any kind of record that I know of when we hit it. And there isn't much spill, of which I had to call a hazmat team to come out to deal with it. And I told them, but if I can't find somebody to cap this thing off, right, then I'm sure the EPA will find who owns it themselves, and the fines that would go along with it. Their attitude was that, well, if we abandon it, the municipality owns the pipe. And I told them, well, I think the municipality would be a little upset to know that the hazardous material hazard that represented by that pipeline is their liability and not yours. And I think the EPA would probably agree with me. But I'm just saying that I've been through that. And sometimes that's the attitude, as you mentioned, Bill, out of sight, out of mind. I know in telco, we keep records of all the abandoned lines. They're on the record. They have X's across them, but the record's still there, and it's kept there until some engineer comes along and decides that he wants to take the time, the effort to remove it. That's it. Thank you.
No, that's good. That really shows the problem we face, and not to mention just how long it takes for a contractor out there working. He's shut down. You can see all the issues involved in this. Not to mention if you're dealing with, hazardous materials, that the safety issues and everything else involved in it. So we're on an important subject here, and I think having some standardization, even some, just education for everybody, knowing the problems, we're making headway just by even addressing it. I was going to say, and then Mr. Schultz, you did mention the HDPE and non-metallic lines, and that's a big issue. I mean, it is pretty easy, our locating equipment and things like that are kind of geared towards having tracer wires or metallic and things like that. But there are, I've been involved with CGA, there are some new technologies I think are coming through that are going to start helping us to at least say, hey, we don't know what that line is, but it is definitely a line or something like that we can start at least identifying abandoned lines without doing, excavation and intrusive research. So if you want to hear more about that, you could contact me or I think even talking to your 811 centers might be able to provide you some guidance on if you're interested in that.
There's two more hands raised.
Okay.
Fraser Campbell, I'm going to allow you to speak.
Hello, Fraser Campbell. I'm with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. As you know, we were founded in 1941. We used to have dirt ditches, and then when I grew up as a backhoe operator, we would find wood pipe. And most of our abandoned structures tend to be our old abandoned water lines out there. They're disconnected from when they jump over the mains, and once it's been made a final connection, they abandon the line. It's in the ground. It's in the city right of way. But we do have record keeping through Navigate LA. We're mostly loading all our new live infrastructure into our GIS. But our abandoned stuff, we have all our old as-built and prints, and that is going to migrate there eventually. And we do have it right now in Navigate LA through our Bureau of Engineering. For us, when I hear the mention about owning it and removing it, the cost is astronomical to excavate here in Los Angeles. So that has to be factored in to any operator of a utility, because the abandonment issue, although it is difficult on an excavator, it's also difficult on the operator, because LA Water and Power is both an excavator and an operator. And we're looking at our concern is making sure our power lines are marked and our water lines. And I don't know if anybody's seen the leaks we've been having here lately, and it's not even leak season because the water is still warm up north. But it was the cost and the manpower. It's hard for me even to start calculating how we would go about that, and not to mention the impact on this city streets. So I'm talking about, we're a major metropolitan utility now. In some of the more rural areas, in the smaller cities, possibly, but even that cost, that doesn't have a cost benefit. I get the responsibility, but this is a very difficult issue to be raised with, because when I put my excavator hat on, sure, I'd like to know that's an old line that I don't have to worry about, that I don't have to dig around and throw away some extra trucks of spoil just to get around it. If I knew it was abandoned, we'd go right through it. So I'm sure this is going to be not a contentious issue, but an issue that's got to be a weight on both sides for all involved. And the bottom line is for public. That's all I got to say for now.
No, thank you, Fraser. You presented that real well, because I mean, yeah, it is a lot of different parties, a lot of issues. Costs are huge. You did mention Navigate LA. I got to say that's probably the best source of underground information of any agency I've seen. I've looked for that in other places, but if for those of you be interested, look up the Navigate LA and you can see underground utilities. They don't have the latest drawings, but they do provide drawings, which is to me that's helpful. Just seeing, even if the drawings are 1990 or something, at least gives you an idea where you're working and stuff. So if I could see agencies catch up to what LA has done as a prototype, it would be a good example. So, but yeah, thanks, Fraser.
Number ending in 4316. I'm gonna allow you to speak now.
Thank you. Steve Wu again. Sorry, guys. My other hat that I'm putting on now is my hat representing excavator contractors as far as abandoned lines are concerned. Our concern is not necessarily just the abandoned lines, but the problem is that we've seen is that the excavators, when they're potholing, when they run across an abandoned line, not knowing if that's the live line or not, assume it's the live line and then figured, okay, I found it, break out the backhoes and damage something. Unfortunately, that's the wrong assumption. And I think what contractor excavators are asking for is that if the line, or they're made aware of that there's abandoned lines in the area of the excavation, then they're going to be more careful about what they find and won't make any assumptions about that what they found is what the marked line is. Oftentimes, when they replace a gas line, the steel gas line's there and place the abandoned one, but under it, usually about 6 inches, 12 inches under it, there'll be a poly line under their gas line. So what happens is the excavator goes down, you find the steel line, says, oh, there's the gas line. And then he breaks out the backhoes and the clay spades. And the next thing he knows, he hits that poly line that's under it. So what we're asking for, as far as contractor excavators are concerned, is for help in bringing that awareness to the excavators so they won't make that assumption that, especially when they're potholing or they're trenching, they won't make their assumption and that there's nothing there other than just the mark line. And that if they're made that aware, even if the abandoned line marking isn't totally accurate, just the fact that we know that there's an abandoned line in the area does make it easier and safer for the excavator contractors. So that's part of the reason why in the SSIP committee, why we made that recommendation with the recognition that, not necessarily they're going to go around potholing for abandoned lines, but while they're potholing for the marked line, that they're aware and they don't make any assumptions about things they run across until they get down to the proposed depth of the work that they're doing. So that's the take from the excavator contractor community, is that help us make us aware that there's an abandoned line in the area, and that will increase our, if you call it, well, increase our awareness to try to avoid that without making wrong assumptions. That's all. Thank you.
Very good. Yeah, good information. So anything else here on question one? Justin?
One more hand raised.
Okay, good.
S. Kelly, I'm going to allow you to speak.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
So just a comment on Steve Wu's last comment. I would hope that when the facility was marked that it would say whether or not it was plastic or steel. So if an excavator hit the plastic line below the steel line, he was not looking for the proper line. That's one comment. I have extensive experience with this. I work for a water utility. And as you guys know, a lot of our water utilities are non-metallic. So identifying lines that are abandoned is very complicated. There's no wire. Our records are bad. And as you guys know, a lot of the roadways have changed. So if you try to identify the location of these based on property lines, it's very difficult. In most cases, what we would do is on active facilities is provide drawings to the excavator. When it comes to abandoned lines, I mean, I think if you talk to any facility owner that's out there, just trying to keep up with the active line locating is more than most of us can do in today's world. When you are asking us to come out and identify where these abandoned facilities are, I think the burden there would take so much of our time that you would now not be getting your active lines marked. As far as the requirements for the cities, as you pointed out earlier, a lot of the cities are not the ones that, you know, maintain sewer or water lines. We have also had challenges where we've run across, you know, abandoned gas lines or petroleum lines. And yes, it is a challenge. And when we do identify those, since they're not listed on the ticket, who do you call? I mean, I understand the problem and I understand the frustration, but I think we really have to look at this in a bigger picture. And maybe as excavators, you know, are pulling these permits, they come to the facility owners and they ask for records. When you're asking a field person to go out and mark these facilities, I just think that you are really asking a lot from facility owners to mark things that they don't know where they are or they have poor records. And I just think overall, it's really going to be a challenge.
Mhm.
That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's that is the issue out there, and you brought up several points. You know, the documentation, who responds. You know, still not knowing who the ownership is, that's still important. So, like you say, you encounter it, who do you call? Yeah, these are all items that we as a board are looking to see, and then see if there is a way to come up with some standards, and if nothing else in the future, work towards a goal of maintaining records of what, as lines are abandoned, that we keep track of them and all. So now that's a great discussion. Anything else on this before we move on to question 2?
How about a repository of abandoned lines where, you know, facility owners provide, you know, old drawings to a repository for specific geographical areas. And as the excavators want to, you know, excavate in those areas, they can, it's like a library. They can go in and they can look at, you know, whatever these facility owners have in their records, instead of putting this back on the facility owners.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
You're preaching to the choir to me, but yeah, it's a great idea. Matter of fact, there's quite a bit of discussion on that, and even ideas of it through the Common Ground Alliance of maybe even like the one call centers being able to have at least in a repository that can, you know, through a ticket can refer you to abandoned lines issues, something in the future. Obviously the details have to be worked out and all, but coming up with software and stuff that as you pull a ticket, it could provide you abandoned line information. Seems to be like it's, you know, could be something they could pull off in the future. So
well,
there's a lot of people thinking like you.
Let me give you full disclosure, Bill. I am a board member on USA North, so this conversation does come up. I don't know if honestly that's really where this information should reside, as you know, this is the ticketing system is what USA North is there for, not for you know, maintaining these files. But I think there may be other areas where we could set up, you know, this, like I said, a geographical, you know, library would probably be the best thing to call it, and let those excavators, you know, be able to have access to those, you know, on a geographical basis. That would be
the owners would have to give it, turn it over to somebody that would be kind of maintaining it, keeping it simple so everybody can get it.
Yes.
Yes. So it's kind of the infant discussion starting now, but it's like sounds like we're in agreement, and that would be a good step to move forward with. So.
Okay. Thank you.
There's 3 other hands raised. Number ending in 4316. I'm allowed to speak.
Hot button. Thank you, John. Bill, I'm sorry. Anyway, when we had this discussion in the SSIP, we all agreed that the most important thing is that the contractor excavator is aware of the presence that there is abandoned lines in the vicinity. It doesn't have to be exact or anything like that. The other thing we cannot also ignore is the fact that no matter if it gets damaged or not, the responsibility to pothole and identify all facilities, within the delineated work area is solely the responsibility of the contractor excavator. So accordingly, the more information they have to avoid these kind of things, that's really what we're talking about. As far as the record keeping, that may be helpful, but maybe it would be even as helpful or more helpful is that the operators would mark, not necessarily locate, but mark the fact that there are abandoned lines within the work area that they should be aware of. But that, again, does not absolve the excavator contractor from the responsibility to pothole down the discovery all facilities down to the depth of their proposed work. That's in conflict. So and that is part of the problem we identified once again, is that some excavator contractors, when they run across something, will just make an assumption that is what the mark line is, without realizing that it's actually a possibility it's an abandoned line. So ultimately, it's still going to be the excavator contractor's responsibility either way. And if you give them more tools to begin the awareness, or more tools where they can do some research for abandoned lines in the area, it's probably a good thing. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
One more hand raised. Stephen, I'm going to allow you to speak now. Looks like Stephen just lowered his hand. Okay, Stephen, I see you now. Go ahead.
Oh.
Hey, this is Stephen. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I pressed lower hand thinking it was the unmute. Just wanted to address Mr. Kelly's comments, and I'm sorry I didn't grab your first name. I'm regarding the ability to have a repository for abandoned lines. The firm that I work for, Civil Grid, has been compiling, as you say, a geographic library of facilities in partnership with different asset owners. The largest one obviously is PG&E, but signing data license agreements to make that data available primarily on that engineering and planning side, so in advance of calling 811, where abandoned facilities have been available for the data sets that we've been provided there. We've ingested those and displayed them marked separately from the live facilities that we've displayed on the map. So happy to have a conversation with you, maybe offline or separately, about what you were looking for there, and whether or not displaying on a web-based map system would work for that purpose.
Good, thank you, Stephen. Yeah, and you're familiar with the CGA, I know, so that's a good place to be bringing up new technology and ideas. So yeah, keep pressing on that front for us too.
No other hands raised.
Okay, well, moving on to question number 2. So next slide, please. Okay, so easements, franchise agreements, and municipal codes can have terms and conditions for installing a buried facility. What we want to know is what is out there, which leads us to our second question. So question 2, does your agency have requirements pertaining to the abandonment of buried facilities? Are you notified when a utility operator abandons a line? And that's it. Yeah. So are you notified when a utility operator abandons the line?
So this is Tony Marino, and I can start with just some people I've talked to. Someone at the city of LA indicated that in order to abandon a line, they are required to file a permit. So it's the same type of permit that you would file to install a line, a U permit. There aren't any specific requirements, such as providing this or that information, but it is part of LA's permit processes. Someone from City of Agora Hills identified that there's no specific procedures related to abandonment of facilities, but there are processes for abandonment of easements, which require city review. And that's what I have to contribute.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that I've been involved in some, relocation lines and things like that, where a major segment of a line might be abandoned in place. And there is a process, for the easement, like you said. Usually with the city jurisdiction, they're gonna might increase the length of the line or their franchise or easement fees and things like that. But it does seem like it's kind of a loose end discussion. They might replace so many feet of abandoned and then replace it with a larger line, but I haven't seen a lot of consistency with any agencies. I was going to ask Member Munoz, from your standpoint, you see more of the agency side. Do you guys get any real feedback on abandoned lines?
I think that's a really good question from that third party model that we're talking about. And I think when one of the participants talked about where the city has a third party, operating their wastewater lines, there typically is a documentation portion that the operator has. They might have a GIS, they might have a registry. And my experience was we gave a report once a year for the asset management strategy, telling them where there were going to be abandoned lines. But that, that didn't go into a city repository. So ultimately, that's kind of where we see that that question, right? We have the operator, we have the owner, and then we have people out in the field. The other thing that's been a relationship that can be a little strained is that sometimes cities may have the 811, they may be members to whatever 811 agency that they're a part of, but some of the operators may not be. They may be using the city's legacy membership. So the shape files and all that updating may not happen with the rigor. And so we may have a discrepancy of what is a live line and what's an abandoned line. So I'd like to hear if there's anybody on the phone that has such a relationship, what that might look like, maybe some best practices, because I've given you a few, of the examples that I've seen.
There's a couple hands raised. David, I'm going to allow you to speak now.
Sorry, do you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, my name's David Wright, and I'm been in the petroleum industry for many years. I can talk a little bit about some of the franchise issues around the metropolitan area in the LA County and Orange County. I think what you'll find today is that there's a wide range of different types of franchise agreements, but the newer ones are very specific about the abandonment of lines and specifically about what is supposed to occur with the abandonment of lines, and that ultimately when you do change ownership, you have to notify the respective agency, and at the same time, if you abandon the facility, you have to have some person from that agency, either their engineer or their city manager or some other party, sign off on the abandonment. And in some cases, the city may want to retain the facility as an empty conduit, expecting there may be used for fiber. And I'm talking primarily petroleum lines. And in some cases, they'll want you to fill the line with some sort of compaction or drilling muds or something that's going to help the line from collapsing as it corrodes. So I think it's just a matter of time that the various agencies around the metropolitan areas will come around to those kind of expected standards in their franchise agreements. Anyway, that's all I've
Thank you,
got.
Dave. Yeah, that's definitely good information. Yeah, and I think that's our point of meeting here is like, what can we do to start standardizing these things? It's nice to hear that the newer agreements seem to be taking into account the disposal. But yeah, it definitely come up with some standards would really help in the future.
There's another hand raised. Number ending in 4316. I'm allowed to speak now.
Thank you, Steve Wu, once again. Just an observation. That is that if the municipality takes over the permitting process to keep records of abandoned lines and things like that, then at that point they are assuming the ownership and the liability of that abandoned line. Frankly, I'm not sure very many municipalities will be willing to do that. The other thing would be is that if in fact the board decides to make a recommendation that they should mark those abandoned lines, and once again, that responsibility would fall to the municipality who owns those records. So that they probably don't like that either. So you know, that's probably going to be a little difficult if the people thought through it, because if they had that agreement, once again, in the permitting process that you have to have a permit in order to abandon a line, then that's under the assumption then that the city is assuming responsibility. And that's probably not something cities would like to do. Anyway, but that's all. I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm sitting out in the car. It's 90 degrees, and I'm at a volunteer event where I'm helping direct some people to help volunteer supporting an ultra marathon. And it's warm here in the car. So the people are gathering here behind me, so I have to go help direct the action.
Right.
So I apologize for that, Bill.
Yeah. Thanks for your input, Steve. All right. Stay hydrated out there now.
Well, I have a bottle here, but it's getting mighty warm in my car.
All right, thanks. So Justin, any other hands?
No other hands raised.
Okay. Let's go ahead and move on to question 3. So when a utility operator abandons a buried facility in your right of way, do you accept ownership of that facility? So that brings up these questions, and Steve was kind of alluding to that. So if you accept ownership, so if so, what are your responsibilities for those facilities? Are those facilities the responsibility of any specific department? If not, what do you do to expect utility operators to continue to be responsible for? And do you have any policies for addressing facilities owned by a company that goes out of business? So we're looking for that one group that's already solved all these problems and has a solution for us here.
This is
And
Tony.
also
Mayor. I can
okay.
provide just what I've heard from City of Agora Hills, which is that ownership is something that happens as an instrument of property transfer through city council. So not, through easements. And that the expectation is that utility operators are responsible for their property in perpetuity or until it's removed. And nothing in particular to offer on companies that go out of business. And that is what I have from City of Agora Hills.
Well, it's a wide variety of issues involved in this. I deal with on the CGA board, and I butt heads all the time with him. He's really a good guy with Kinder Morgan, and he's kind of there involved in abandoned facilities. But most of his facilities are out in farmlands and across rural areas, and they're going through farms and things like that. So he's able to turn those over to the to the landowners, and they just they take responsibility for them and all. But yeah, as we deal with cities, and I think as we're primarily focusing right now, yeah, it's kind of all over the map. But I think standardizing this is the key. Any thoughts or any I guess through your agency, if a way you would like to see it done? Well, Tony, I think it was a good try to ask this question, but yeah, I think it is it's the solution we're all looking for. I think somebody would be doing this. Okay, well, seeing there's no further discussion on this, we'll move to the closeout. We go to the next slide. So yeah, but final thoughts before we end today's workshop. Are there any other comments on today's topic? So anything we didn't really cover that you'd like to bring up, and anything that pertaining to abandoned lines that you think could help us focus our efforts?
There's a hand raised. Sean, I'm going to allow you to speak.
Thank you, and thank you, John, for putting this together today. My name is Sean Eskis. I work for a special district that maintains the sewer system strictly for the Tri-City area in the Bay Area. And I've seen this come up, and again, we talk about agencies, we talk about cities that some cities deal with sewer and water, but again, my agency is a special district that focuses strictly on sewer. We have just over 850 miles of pipe that maintain or runs through 3 cities. And we have twin force mains that run from our south area all the way to the north treatment plant that are about 39 inches in diameter at the largest. So we don't have something like Los Angeles or somewhere where our lines are. I think our deepest line is probably 33 feet, I believe. So today I wanted to share a little bit about us as we do abandoned lines. In our department under construction, we do not abandon lines ourselves. All these lines that we've dealt with over the years for abandonment has been done by the contractor, either reinstalling new structures or taking that one completely off the grid in a sense. So our practice is to, when that line is taken out of service, it's never removed unless it's in a trench that's going to be reused. So there are in our GIS system, it's documented under either a hash line, purple hash line for the pipeline, and purple circles for the manholes. As we all know, sewer is always one of those that are somewhat could be the easiest to locate if you're working on gravity lines by identifying the manholes. But again, our practice in our department is to provide a contractor, if they're doing work in that area, with a map that identifies these abandoned lines or manholes. And so we will meet with them, and it doesn't matter. We respond 24/7 during business hours and after hours to the contractor's needs if there's an emergency after hours. Of course, the lines that are abandoned are filled with grout. That's one of our procedures that's followed at all times, so that the grout tubes are installed by the contractor, they're grouted, and then the line is completely signed off at that point. And we do not provide the length or the actual location of the abandonment. So most of the time when we're abandoning manholes, for instance, they will take the first cone and barrel section off of the manhole, and then they'll fill it in from there. But we used to actually have a wireless printer on our response vehicle, so that if the response person or the USA person is going out to mark the tickets, can meet with the contractor and actually print a map at that time. But we found that there wasn't a benefit of that. We don't get a lot of these requests. And so to keep that printer up and working was difficult. Again, they are filled with grout. We don't provide measurements off of the curb or anything like that when we're doing this. So that's what I wanted to share. But we've been very fortunate to not have any issues with abandoned lines, and again, because they're filled with grout, it's a little bit easier to identify. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sean. That was really informative, and yeah, I suspect we'll be contacting you to pick your brain on things as they move forward. But yeah, it sounds like you have a good plan, and yeah, while you might not be the biggest agency, it's kind of nice to have a plan that works and use that as a prototype. So yeah, appreciate that. Any other comments, Ann, or a follow up to Sean's statement?
Bill, am I still connected? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I find it interesting because as a sewer agency, there's not a lot of representation. When I sit on the cargo meetings for legislation and regulations, we're actually getting ready to talk about non-pressurized systems under the SB, I think it's 1345 at the August 10th meeting. And so I was hoping to hear a little bit more from the sewer agency side, being that we work on majority of the lines are non-pressurized. And of course, even nowadays, which we've been talking about in our agency a lot more, is it's a line of sight, manhole to manhole, when we're locating these things. And there are some agencies that may use tracer wires, but again, to line these out, it can be very difficult at sometimes, depending on the curvature of the road or the layman of the pipe when it's put in. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, let me follow up and just ask you real quick then. So as you're putting in new items, it's probably concrete or you're using plastics or non-metallic. So do you use tracer lines in, or you said you don't?
We do not. We do not require.
Okay, so just line of sight then. Yeah.
Yes, line of sight.
Okay. Okay, any other hands, Justin?
No hands raised.
Okay. So now that we've heard from the public, are there any comments from board members?
I guess I would just like to thank everybody for coming and spending time with us, going through the discussion. For those of you who are a little shy to speak, perhaps you would be interested in sending your comments in. Maybe that's an option. And there's the email right there so that you can send comments in, or maybe you think about something and you have comments to share at a later time. Staff would love to hear your input. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That covered my next item. So, so then yeah, you see that's our email address, digboard@energysafety.ca.gov. And yeah, it would be nice to hear. Feel free to give us some feedback on this. And then also, I'd like to invite you to our next our workshop next week on potholing. So we'll be looking to hear what information excavators need to effectively pothole and what operators need in order to assist excavators. And so those details are on our website. And then we also have surveys. We are considering developing a planning ticket, and we're looking to hear from operators and designers about what information is shared in the design process. And with that, really do, Member Munoz said, appreciate your time, and I think this is productive. I think we're starting things moving on this, and look forward to working with you more on this as we move towards coming up with these solutions to excavate safely and be more efficient with our systems. So, so the workshop is now adjourned, and thank you all, and stay safe.